Yesterday I was talking about Amalek, and we went through why, how Hashem described why we have to remember Amalek. And he said, when you were ayef umiyagea, you were totally exhausted. And of course, we understand this to be the slave leaving Egypt after 200 years, going into a whole new way, totally finished on every level, physical, emotional, spiritual. But I was thinking, and I was looking, and I was seeing that the exhaustion, of course, stemmed from the experience in Egypt, but from the minute they got out of Egypt till they got to Rephidim, they didn't know a moment's peace. They did not know one moment of rest. They went straight from getting out of Egypt to being terrified at the sea before it split, sandwiched in between. Then they got to a place finally, and after wandering for days, they got to water, but it was bitter and they couldn't drink it. And then they got to another place, and all the bread, the dough that they had taken with them from Egypt was finished, and they had nothing to eat. And then they come to another place, they come to Rephidim, and again, now there's no water at all. And then on top of all that, on the back of that, there's water, and Amalek attacks. So they didn't know one moment of rest before they got the Torah. Not one moment of rest. And we could say, how could Hashem do this to them? It seems so cruel. They were so pathetic. They were so wiped out. They'd been through so much. How could Hashem do this to them? What's going on here? And so if we understand it from a whole different perspective, and we begin to understand that this Hashem was ordering step by step a process that would enable them to receive the Torah, would enable them to do a lot of restructuring again and again and again, to open them up, to create new capacity to receive the Torah. Because we cannot receive anything that we are not built to receive. And so here we have this ragtag people that had no confidence, no experience that would allow them to be able to be vessels, to be filled up with Hashem's light. And getting out of Egypt was only on promise and merit and the hanging on of a few residual things that they remembered, but they had nothing to go on. And Hashem understood that there was amazing kindness to them to give them experiences that would allow them to ingest and digest what they were going to be given. Because the real cruelty would be to give them something that they could not begin to digest or appreciate. So what's going on here? And I might have said this to some people privately, but it's very, very appropriate because the nation, Avraham began a process that was going to be a prototype for the nation of Israel, and from the nation of Israel as a prototype for all the nations of Hashem's creation. So with Avraham, we find something very unusual. He came to Hashem on his own. His kidneys were his teachers. He was very intuitive. He was very mindful. He was examining the world around him. And he came to God uniquely. He had nobody to teach him. It had to happen from him observing his environment in a whole new way, from him studying things that came to his hand, and him using his very bold intellect to come to Hashem. But this wasn't enough. This wasn't going to make him into an Avraham who could carry the torch of Hashem's Torah into the next generations through the nation of Israel and on to all the nations, it wasn't enough. So that's why we see with Avraham something very, very unique. You know, a lot of people in Tanakh had hard lives. As a matter of fact, most people in the Tanakh did not have easy lives. It's not a unique thing to Avraham. And you know, again, that's not even the topic so much, but it is the topic exactly. You know, you look at all these righteous people through the Tanakh, that all they wanted really was to do the will of Hashem and to know Him and to grow as human beings and to give to the creation, to preserve the creation, to enhance the creation of Hashem. And they were really had very, very, very trying lives. But of all of them, only Avraham, it is said about him that he had the 10 trials. But what about David? It didn't say about David the trial. I mean, David was sorely tried. You know, there was tremendous trial and tribulation for so many. But it's this famous concept that many had trials and tribulations. But of Avraham, it was given the label, the trials, these tests. And all these tests have one common denominator. Every single test of Avraham had one common denominator, and that common denominator was that it was absolutely out of logic. No logic. There was no logic to it. It was beyond the intellect. Each one. We're not going to go through them now. Go through them. Every single one made no, go to the land that I show you, go down to Egypt. Each one made no sense. It took him out of his intellect. He had a powerful intellect. He utilized it to come to Hashem, but he needed, in addition, because Torah study is very important, perceiving Hashem in your life is very important, recognizing that, examining that, coming to that, using your intellect as Hashem would have us use this gift that He gave us is certainly critical. We're not just about just believing and not using our minds and not questioning, not examining, not observing. That's not what we're about either. But however, that alone could be extremely problematic. Because when we develop a relationship with Hashem that is solely based on my intellectual prowess, I noticed, I learned, I examined, I saw, these light bulbs that go off, and now it all makes sense to me, and now I'm in it. There's a very big problem to that, because when something happens that I do not understand, that I cannot accept, then it all falls to pieces. It all falls apart. And therefore, Avraham, as the prototype for bringing Hashem into his life, bringing Hashem into the world, needed to have the tests. And every single test took him out of his intellect. And of course, the top test, Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, he spends his entire life, teaching, preaching a certain idea, and then he has to go through this whole experience for days, walking, doing, which is so against everything that he ever understood, everything that he ever taught. And it was all to relinquish preconceived notions, to get to a place where I am at once very, very impressed and feeling very capable and ready to step up to the plate, but at the same time feeling, I don't get it, I'm just relinquishing myself to the will of Hashem. And that's the synthesis that Hashem requires of us. And it's not because He needs it, as my husband was saying a few times, not because He needs this, because without this balance, we cannot have a relationship with Hashem. It's impossible. It's impossible. And so now we are going to see the nation of Israel, and they had a terrible time in Egypt. It says kotzer ruach. They couldn't even breathe. They were totally depleted, numb, totally without hope. So they were slaves in every way. And Hashem was going to take these people and help them with baby steps to be able to transform themselves from slaves, mindless slaves, to servants of Hashem. And it's a very, very big difference. So how does one, in general, change? How does a person change? How do we change anything about ourselves? How? And there are two ways that a person changes. One way that a person changes is by some earth-shattering, almost traumatic, life-changing event that shocks us, like some sort of shock therapy that reorders everything how we thought about anything. Okay? That's one way. And another way is lifestyle changes. The first way is very dramatic. Boom, just it hits you out of the ballpark. The other way is these lifestyle changes in routine, little things, little adjustments to the way we go about our lives that slowly help us reorder ourselves and make the changes that we want to make. So based on those two things, we could examine what happens to the nation of Israel from the minute they leave Egypt until they get to Chorev, to the mountain of Sinai. So what's going on? We see first, the earth-shattering experience was, of course, the splitting of the sea. Every single thing they thought about Egypt changed at that moment. They were standing at the sea and they were saying, how could you do this to us? It would have been better in Egypt, and because they were still so dependent on Egypt, they still had this tremendously awed reverence for what Egypt stood for, the might. There had never been a slave that escaped Egypt. They were mesmerized by what Egypt was, and they were totally muted in their own minds by Egypt. And the only way that Hashem could get them out of that was to shatter their conception altogether. So all the might of Egypt went down in such an extremely incredible, traumatic way that there was no way that experience did not alter their psyche. And and there's even a little, we can understand it, but there's even a little hint to it when in chapter 15, verse 23, I believe it is. It's verse 22. It says Moses. Now, even in the English, if you now pay attention, you could even see it in the English, but it's very, very clear in the Hebrew. It says here in the English, Moses caused Israel to journey from the Sea of Reeds. This is very strange. Moses caused Israel to journey. What does that mean? The people journeyed with Moses. Moses led the people journeyed. Moses caused the people. So we see here, it says, Vayasa Moshe. That means Moshe literally carried them. He pulled them from there. They were gaping. They were in shock. They were traumatized, a positive trauma. They couldn't move. They were frozen in place because everything. Hashem did all these amazing things in Egypt to the plagues and everything else. But let's remember that for the most part, the nation of Israel was in Goshen. They were in their little place. They weren't experiencing these things. They knew it was happening, but they didn't have the experience in the same close way that they now experience it on the sea. And they couldn't believe what they were seeing. And so they literally had this earth-shattering moment that we spoke of that to enable a change. How were they going to be transformed from slave to servant of Hashem? So that's the first step. But they had to be, it was literally pulled from there. Then they get to Marah. In Marah, they journey from there and they come to Marah and they 3 days. Finally, there's water and they can't drink the water. It's bitter. It's bitter. And what do? They complain, and it says, "Vayalonu ha'am al Moshe." They threw the whole thing onto Moshe, like Moshe was in charge. They didn't throw it onto Hashem. It's very, very interesting because there's a slave mentality here. so Moshe's their new master, he's the new persona. He's the one, it's like he adopted them, it's just the next in line. And they still did not have the understanding in a sensitive way. And they saw Moshe like a little child would see a parent, blame a parent. Did it ever happen when you see like a toddler fall on the face and they start getting angry at the parent that they fell down because they trust that parent so much. They're this little child, that's their whole world, and they did not have the spiritual maturity at this point. And so so this is the whole thing that was just thrown onto Moshe. And so Hashem begins to do something here. First of all, what happens here is that it says that Moshe threw, it says etz. Hashem pointed out a etz to Moshe, a tree to Moshe, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There was only one problem, according to the old tradition, that this etz that he threw into the water was bitter. There's a difference, was it? Different kinds of plants was said that to be, but it was a bitter plant. So this bitter plant was thrown into the bitter water, and it became sweet. So if it would have been some sort of, stevia or something thrown into the water, then it would be, one thing. But Hashem is reordering again. He is taking them outside nature. Bitter plus bitter is counterintuitive. It's almost like, Avram going through things that are counterintuitive, that don't really make sense, to slowly wean them off of the slave mentality and wean them onto what it means to be a servant of Hashem, and to begin to scratch the surface of trying to approach Hashem as master of the universe. So he puts this bitter into bitter, and it makes sweet. But what's very, very interesting, I found very interesting, because it was a plant, it was a branch. And it says in Hebrew, first of all, Vayireu Hashem. Hashem showed it to Moshe. So there's Moshe, everyone's hysterical, they're blaming him, there's no water, the people are totally spiritual infants, and there's a whole crisis going on. They're all looking at Moshe like he's their new deity. He's their new master, and he doesn't know what to do. And the nation is watching Hashem show Moshe what to do. So gently, Hashem is saying, Moses is not a deity. Moses is also looking to Hashem to know what to do. And not only that, in the wording here, it says, Vayoreu Hashem etz. And anytime, maybe I have an obsession. Anytime I see the word etz in the Tanakh, I think of the trees in the Garden of Eden, because it's etz. It didn't say a branch. It didn't say what kind of branch. It just says etz. And it always sends me back there. And I was thinking that the nation of Israel had to be able to move out of the Eitz Hadat, tree of knowledge experience, into the tree of life experience. Because what does it mean, the tree of knowledge experience? What I think, what I'm interpreting, how I'm translating the situation, how it looks to me, what I'm remembering, what caused me anguish. It's all about how I am interpolating onto my experience, and it's really all going on in my head based on my own translations and perceptions. And this is not going to wash for them to be able to stand at the foot of Sinai and get the Torah. It's not going to work. So what ended up is that Hashem was trying to, again, show them it's the tree, and you need to gently be able to move into the Eitz HaChaim, the life, experience. Sometimes we trust our mind very, very much. But sometimes the mind is wrong. Lots of times we thought one thing and it was another thing. Sometimes the mind is wise and sometimes the mind is not. Sometimes we think the mind is telling us something very, very important, but it's very, very not important. Sometimes the mind is telling us something and we think we have to obey. You know, my mind is telling me I'm very, very angry right now, so I'm going to yell and scream. We think we have that urge, we got to obey. We think so. But when we begin to realize that our mind is our tool, and it has to be watched, it's not always our friend. It's an important tool, a powerful tool. Without it, we cannot be a servant of Hashem properly either. But our mind is not us. And we have to now be able to understand that. So they get the water in a way that begins to show them that Hashem is beyond nature and what you thought before is not. And Moshe is a man. He's a great man. He's your leader. But he is not your master. And it's beginning to take the people gently but firmly someplace else. And actually what ends up happening here is so. And then it's interesting. It says Vayitzak el Hashem, and he called out to Hashem, and it's Moshe, but it's not. Moshe is not identified. I want you to remember that. In this place, Moshe is not identified yet. It's Moshe that's calling out to Hashem, and it's not the nation of Israel. And so, and then Hashem shows him this tree, and he throws it in, and the water is sweet. And then it says there they were given some of the laws, and there they were tested. Very ambiguous. What laws, what tests, is very different things, what was given here. And I don't want to go into it because we don't have time. But basically they were given para aduma, some Shabbat laws, some say honoring about honoring parents. They were given certain laws here even before, like a taste, even before. And when it says, and it was tested, Hashem was testing to see how they were beginning to digest. And we all know para aduma, the red heifer, is which was given here after this whole thing, is the classic, I can't understand why you're telling me to do this, but it's very similar to bitter plus bitter makes sweet. Just like, unclean, it makes you unclean and you clean. It doesn't make sense. It's because it's Hashem's world. It's Hashem's world. And so, this is being illustrated to them. They are beginning to learn a new language so that they could come, with God's help, to Sinai. And then Hashem ends it. He says, and if you obey, etc., and so forth. All the illness that I put on Egypt. What illness? We could take illness as a spiritual malaise, this distance from Hashem, this very, very wrong conception of what God is. I won't put that on you. Why? Ki ani Hashem rofecha. Because he's identifying his role for them. One of his roles, one of his labels that he is now giving them. It's a new one. I am Hashem, your doctor. So what does this mean? Until now, they were slaves. A slave is dependent on the whim of the master. Okay? A slave is dependent on the whim of the master. And that means a slave, he might do wrong and get punished. The master might have mercy. He might get very punished even if he didn't do anything wrong. But it's at the total whim. Now, if I have a doctor, and the doctor tells me, do A, B, C if you want to get well. And let's say I don't do A, B, C, and I don't get well, God forbid. That is not the doctor punishing me. And the doctor is not, it's not this fire and brimstone, Old Testament, punitive God. Hashem is saying, I am giving you things in order that you can stand healthy and tall. If you use it, wonderful. If you don't use it, it might not be wonderful, but that has nothing to do with God. It's about you and what you do or what you don't do. Another lesson for these former slaves. Okay. Then they go to Elim. It's pretty quiet there for the moment, which is nice. And now they go. Now they go. Where do they go? Now they go to. Let's switch first. I assume Elim by vote. They got to the desert of Sin. Okay, and the entire nation of Israel complains to Moshe and Aaron. And they say, let's read the English, if only we had died by the hand of Hashem in the land of Egypt, as we sat by the pot of meat, when we ate bread into satiety, for you have taken us out to this wilderness to kill this entire congregation by famine. So the first thing this is clearly the romanticization of the past. Now this is what we do when we get into crisis mode very often and when we're being tested. Everything was so great, why can't I do the good old days? But it wasn't really the good old days. It wasn't the good old days at all. And they weren't sitting around. They had kotzer ruach. They weren't given a moment's peace. So what is this? Because now, with the challenge that they're experiencing, they're in some sort of romantic never land about what their mind is imagining was. And so they get to this place. And just like the pagan mindset was that Moshe is some deity, there are other pagan mindsets that need to be burst open for them. And what's going on here? So they get to Midbar Sin, and Hashem gives them the manna. Not only is God turning nature on its head, that means that instead of food coming up from the ground, it is now coming out of the sky, which again, it's like Hashem has no boundaries. Hashem is not nature. Hashem is master of nature. And so they're getting this real wake-up call, and it's the same thing. It's interesting, when I taught about challah a few years ago, it was the same concept, because as soon as the nation of Israel stepped over the threshold into the land of Israel, the manna stopped, and they got the mitzvah of taking challah. Because the mitzvah of taking challah is the same thing as the man. And what is that? We are meant as human beings to elevate our material life, our lifestyle, our possessions, our daily activities. We are meant to elevate it, and it can be elevated. And so the whole manna experience is not only Hashem turning nature upside down, it is also to illustrate that we can serve Hashem in this world, in the material world, using the raw materials that are provided in the material world, which can be elevated to holiness, to sanctity. So that is another thing that they're learning here, and yet another very famous pagan mindset. Now they're being washed slowly, because they have to be spoon-fed slowly, so they could stand upright at Sinai. And another pagan mindset here that they are being it was having debunked for them is, how does the manna work? The manna works that you get it every day, and it comes close to your home, and it's just the right amount for that day, and it's just the right amount for that amount of people. It's very tailor-made. It's very, very intricately and intimately involved with each and every person on a daily basis. And paganity says, maybe there's a God, but he doesn't care about this world. He's not involved with this world. He created the world, and he just, took off. He's not involved. And here they're getting the man, and they are seeing how Hashem is involved with them daily, because they couldn't take more, because it would rot. Because Hashem is involved with you brand new tomorrow. Yesterday's portion you've outgrown. It's not appropriate. The relationship is totally new, and it's every day, and Hashem knows what you need and how much you need, and he certainly is able to provide it for you. So they went now through that experience. Okay, now they get to Refidim. And as we said, Refidim, yesterday we said Refidim comes from the word Rifayon, which means like throwing up one's hands, feeling weak, feeling incapable. And it says over there that they were testing Hashem. They were just like a child will test boundaries. It's natural. It's a natural part of growing up. Do you mean it? Could you really do it? Are you going to do what you said? It's a part of becoming more mature. It says right in the verse that they test Hashem. So what happens? Let's go to verse. Here we go. Okay. And now once again, it says like this, the people contended with Moses, and they said, "Give us water that way we may drink." Moses said to them, "Why do you contend with me? Why do you test Hashem?" So what's going on? Before it was all about Moshe. They really couldn't understand. They couldn't understand. It's just like a child thinks their parent is God, the parent is everything. So Moshe is gently introducing the idea that you're testing Hashem. Hashem is in this picture. Let's reroute the focus very gently onto Hashem. And he said, why is it that you have brought us from Egypt to kill me and my children and my livestock through thirst? Okay. Now, what's very interesting about these verses before we go on, when I noticed this when I was reading it, it says like this. In chapter 17, verse 1, it says, "Ein mayim lishtot ha'am." First tells us there's no water. Okay. Vayarev ha'am Moshe, and they fought with Moshe. Vayomru tnu lanu mayim v'nishteh. Okay. And then it says in verse Gimel, "Vayitzma sham ha'am l'mayim," and the nation was thirsty. They weren't thirsty initially; they were anticipatory. It's very, very interesting. It was an issue of emunah. They had everything they needed. They were okay. Nobody was thirsty yet. But they were so anticipatory and scarred that they had to test Hashem. And they had to know, will you really be there for me? Will you really, really be there for me? And this was part of their growing up experience. Okay. So what does he say? So Hashem says to Moshe, "Hineni omed lefanecha sham al hatzur b'chorev." They're in Refidim. It's very close to Chorev, to Sinai, but it's not yet Sinai. And Hashem says like this. He says, "Behold, I shall stand before you by the rock in Chorev. You shall." So he's sending Moshe to Chorev to strike the rock that was going to flow toward the people, to bring them gently toward the Chorev experience, the Sinai experience, to allow them to know what we call Mayim Chaim, the water of life, is Hashem's word, Hashem's illumination, Hashem's relationship with us, Hashem's Torah. So they weren't even yet there, but they're testing. You know, you're going to really take care of us here. And he's leading them. He's leading them gently, gently to where they need to go. And he's illustrating for them very, very clearly where they could experience the tree of life, where they could live. Okay, and so they got the water. They didn't even leave. They just finished that, and Amalek strikes. And it's very, very different because, again, we see a maturation. When they were standing at the sea before it split and they were freaked out totally, they're told, Hityatzvu u're'u, stand still and watch. That means they were not involved. They were just observers. Observers. It was being done for them, like a small child whose parents will, you know, cut up the food for them. You just be there. I will feed you. That's okay. And now they're going through these experiences which are slowly helping them to mature. And when it comes to fighting Amalek, and it says as follows, choose people for us and go do battle with Amalek. They have to do it themselves. They have to stand up and begin to take responsibility. They have to begin to believe that they can do it alone. They have to have that experience. And so every single thing, as we see, they went through, which could seem so cruel. I mean, please give them a break. They don't have a minute to breathe from the minute they, 210 years in Egypt, boom, 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 boom. There's not a minute. There's no air. And it could see, you look at this, from a different type of eyes, and you see a very cruel God with no mercy, just one after another, after another, after another. And when we begin to just scratch it, we hardly got anywhere. This is just a taste, We don't have all night. And it's basically to allow us to see that there's a plan here, and God is not a cynic. Hashem is not out to get us. This is not about punishment. This is not about punishment. This is actually about polishing, and very often we look at conflict and we look at strife and challenge and problems as punishment. Hashem is punishing. He doesn't love us. Look what he's doing to us, and again and again and again. And instead, what he's actually doing is allowing us to reconstruct from the inside and polish ourselves and grow so that we can open up to receive. So we can open up to receive what? Hashem's illumination. Why? So that we could stand straight and tall and be the people that Hashem knows that we could be. But it's all about our willingness to go. So everything changes. How are we looking at this? When we go through things, if we go through things from the perspective that Hashem is putting us through things so that we are ready to stand at Sinai, receive and grow and be people, then everything changes for us when we go back and go through this again. So I just want to thank you all once again for a wonderful opportunity, and it's a pleasure.